I use bolts and promises all throughout this app, and I want to show you a couple other things. Feel free to poke around, look at all my commands. I use bolts everywhere in the commands. Let's head over to Data Dragon and specifically to the cache image champion images task. This is a command that's responsible for taking a whole bunch of URLs for all of the images in the application. And as I mentioned in other videos, there's over 1,500 different images, and I cache them all locally so that the application works offline. And I use bolts to batch up chunks of images to cache. So I have basically a maximum of 25 images per batch, and I just do that because bolts won't allow you to flood the application, the concurrency mechanism with promises. So what happens is I batch this up, and I'm not going to go through all this, but I wanted to show you one thing here. That is, I run using AF networking. I create promises, and I add these promises here using the task completion source right here. I create a promise, and I add that to a collection of promises, and then I go ahead and run the AF networking request, which runs on a different thread of its own managing. And when I get a result back, I don't do anything with it because I simply let the URL cache store it locally. So if there's an error, of course, I resolve to the promise to an error. So then, if I've hit the maximum images per batch, or I've reached the end of the number of images that I'm caching, I create a promise that waits for the completion of this batch. So this is an example of running things in parallel. I make 25 requests. AF networking dispatches as many of those as it needs to onto a background queue. I don't have visibility of that. It just creates its own background queue with n number of threads and just completes all that work. When all 25 of those complete, this line right here returns a promise that resolves when all 25 of those complete. And then I just wait. I block this thread until that's finished. So this thread, this is already running on a background queue, so that's why it's okay for me to wait until finished. That just blocks this thread. I would not do this on the main thread because my UI would become unresponsive while these images are being retrieved over the network and cached locally. So and then what I do is I just clear the cache of promises, and I start over, and I do the next batch and the next batch and the next batch until I've cached every image for every champion and every champion skin. So just an example, running things in parallel and using bolts to help manage that.